I have a little over 600 hours in Animal Crossing New Horizons. I started playing right at 12 when the game released, and I've kept up with my island relatively often in the years since then. I was always really interested in making my island as aesthetically pleasing as possible, like those island tour videos you might have seen before. So I was always kind of keeping a close eye on how the community was innovating and finding new ways to decorate. So when things like The Path, yes that's what it's called, were being released and styles like cottagecore were becoming popular, I would look back on my island and be like, well, this kinda sucks. Now, most people wouldn't care, or if they did, they would probably just delete their town and start over, but I liked my silly little villagers and my copious amounts of bells, so I decided to just renovate what was already there. If you've ever flattened your island before, especially when your island is already decently built out, it's really hard to get the motivation to complete it, especially with how crowded and unorganized things get. My beach was unwalkable for literal years. And you know what? That version of my island lasted for 3 months before I changed it again. I didn't even finish the previous version, but I'll get into that later. My island has gone through 3 different phases before I got it to the point where I'm genuinely proud of it. It still isn't done, but it's at least presentable as long as you don't go looking in certain places. So, I'd like to take you through the island of Kuriko and its many forms. The first version of my island was supposed to be vaguely Japanese garden themed. The game released around springtime, so those items were pretty easy to make until it wasn't. The most important part of my island planning though was that I wanted it to be relatively low maintenance. In New Leaf, I always hated having to change my path with seasons, especially with how painstaking it was. I wanted my island to look good at any season without having to tear it up each time. Looking back on this version, it's obvious that I wanted a finished looking island as fast as possible, but I didn't really have the items to do it, so a lot of spaces are filled with trees, flowers, and terraforming, which isn't bad, it's just not what I was going for. I also just wasn't very good at it yet. I didn't use any custom paths for main walkways, but I did sprinkle in some here and there. I'll give myself some credit, this was pretty impressive for a build that I made in the 2 months after the game came out, it just had some growing pains. Speaking of those 2 months, the things the community was creating in that short amount of time was insane. I mentioned the path earlier, which very quickly had tons of variants to fit whatever theme or season you had. There was also replacements for water, rocks, and a big one, which I never used much myself, was using the simple panel item to make fake buildings. Not just buildings, people were making straight up castles, it was insane. So when I eventually decided to renovate my island to fit the times, I had a few goals for the second version. I wanted to incorporate more custom paths despite my previous wish of not wanting to switch my paths every season. I wanted more intricate and intentional terraforming, and I especially wanted to have separate areas for all my villagers. I didn't have them all planned, but the few I decided on was a diner for Meringue, an outdoor library for Melba, and a carnival for Dizzy and Stitches. I thought it would be a neat way to fill in space, especially because I was going to space them evenly throughout the island. To be honest, there are still some parts of this version I still really enjoy, but it was a struggle even getting it to this point. I was really impatient with planning, which was by far my biggest downfall here. I got super stressed by the amount of clutter, and I didn't plan out where everything was going to go, so I got more stressed about deciding even the smallest details. A side note though, I like many others didn't know that you couldn't move resident services, so I chose an island with a short distance from the airport and I ran into a lot of problems trying to hide it. I took a bit of a break through building to get X rank in Splatoon 2, but then the 2.0 update came out and changed literally everything. There were so many new items added to the game, and so many of them were game-changing for decoration. The castle set, medieval building, and the storefront immediately replaced many simple panels that people had previously used to make fake buildings. The overall bar had been raised tremendously, and I was devastated. I had like 350 hours at this point. Was I really gonna start over again after all the stress I went through just to get to this point? Yes, but this time I had a plan. The community at this point was way more diverse in what kind of builds people were making. Many people were embracing more town-like builds with tons and tons of items now at their disposal, and I had tons of ideas for this new version. I returned to my original vision of keeping it low maintenance for every season. I scrapped the villager areas idea in favor of having streets with a few villagers on each one. I wanted this version to feel lived in and cozy. Animal Crossing has always been very calming for me, once I can get things set up and not while sitting on my beach. Seriously, I don't think Gulliver was very comfortable sleeping over there. So I wanted to be able to load up my game and walk around somewhere comforting almost. But arguably more importantly, I wanted it to not be laggy. Have you ever been to a dream address and you can just tell Nintendo was not prepared for it to exist? I wanted to be able to come to my island when it's completed and walk around in the correct frame rate. Now that we've been through everything, I'll let you watch a little tour of what I have so far. It's around 70% done at this point, I'd say, so keep that in mind, but regardless, I hope you enjoy. It. I think it's really interesting that you can see these popular trends show up in my builds over the years, and that's partly why I wanted to talk about it. I love New Horizons despite it not having the atmosphere I loved so much in New Leaf, but I think getting to look back on New Horizons builds made me really appreciate how much the community really drove the game forward regardless. I hope you enjoyed my little walkthrough of the past 3 years, and if I ever get around to finishing my island, I'll be sure to post the DA in the comments. So yeah, thanks for watching.